it's wonderful that you've come out tonight to hear Margaret and I in conversation. I want to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people, and we have a lot of work to do in this year in particular, in many years, as we tell the truth about what happened on this country, on this land, and as we move to treaty, and of course, as we move to a referendum in this very big year, and create a voice to our parliaments, a voice that must make a difference to create greater justice for our First Nations people. And before Margaret and I begin our conversation, I just want to say something about the last fortnight in politics. It's been a very big fortnight, and I'm freshly returned to you, and Margaret has spent the last week with me in the Australian Parliament. So I'm hoping we're going to hear some of her reflections on our democracy relative to the American democracy. But this has been a big fortnight in terms of putting a first restraint on coal and gas in our country. That's a big thing. And we all know it's not enough. We have to stop all new coal and gas. The IPCC tell us, the science tells us, we know that's where we need to go as a country. That's our responsibility. But we have taken a really important step in a first instance in putting a cap on carbon and creating a downward trajectory, which is what we need to do. We need to go fast, faster than this will do, but we have a first step taken, which is very important. And as I hope you've all heard Adam Bandt say, this is really a significant step in that it could put on hold half of the 116 new coal and gas projects which are in the pipeline for our country, none of which should go ahead for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. And we've also put some measures in place that really do create greater integrity in our offset system, a significant improvement in the measuring of gas, and a range of measures which are complex and difficult for many people to understand, but are a step in the right direction, very important. We've also seen in the last fortnight a control put in place in the National Reconstruction Fund, which is a $15 billion spend of your money to make the transition across to a renewable future. And that fund will not be able to put any of its dollars towards coal and gas or any aspect of coal and gas development. And that's a really important win still. We're still arguing about another very important topic, and that's housing. And we are pushing hard for an improvement on the Labor offering, which won't build enough houses for what we need to deal with the housing crisis. It's very real in this city, but it's very real in every town, every region, and every city in our country. We've also had a lot of conversation last fortnight about AUKUS, so we'll talk a little bit about that, Margaret and I, but that is a big issue for our country and our future also. And of course, we saw the referendum legislation on the voice move through the lower house. So a very big week for Australian democracy. Mm-hmm. But I want to start by introducing Margaret. And it's really mean to your friends when they come to visit you and you make them do a public event. But Margaret is a very special person. She's visited Australia 10 times, and we have visited each other on many occasions over the last 3 decades. We are feminists together, economists together, and Labor educators, and on the side of progressive politics. And I remember, I'm ashamed to say, the first time I went to the US, I thought, I really didn't believe there were progressive Americans. And Margaret shocked me by being exactly on my wavelength politically. Yeah. And she is my trusted voice in a relation to American politics. So everything Margaret says to you tonight, you can believe. And there's some Americans you just can't believe.
Right, that's right. That's exactly right.
Margaret founded the Wayne Morse Center in the University of Oregon. Margaret's from the west coast of the US. And the Wayne Morse Center is a really important intellectual site on the west coast of the US, which was set up in the name of the senator who was the only person to vote against the Vietnam War. So a very important legacy of progressive politics that Margaret has been part of and led for many years, and a very astute observer for decades of race politics, gender politics, the justice system and its failures, the economy, inequality, and women's rights. So when I got elected, Margaret said to me, "Oh my God, are you crazy?" But I'm going to come to Australia and carry your bags.
That's what I said.
And that's what we did last week together, which was an amazing thing to share. So let me start, Margaret, by asking you, what is wrong with America?
Well, I asked for that question to start because I thought it would be important just to sort of frame it. There are very deep things happening in the United States, and it's lots of historical roots to what's happening right now. But I would say that if you look globally, there are lots of things happening around the globe. For example, the tendency towards autocratic, totalitarian, right-wing populist parties, for example. There's inequality, the neoliberalism. But there are three unique aspects of the US situation that I think make us more extreme on all of these trends that are going on. Like, we are one of the most highest inequality, really, of advanced nations. We have elected a right-wing populist who is practically destroying our democracy. So there's roots to these that I just want to frame when we start, and then we could get into them a little bit more. And the first is race. I don't think you can understand the United States unless you really understand the role of race and racial oppression in the United States. It's embedded, white supremacy is embedded in every institution, in every organization, and really in all of us unknowingly. And I'm very proud of the resurgence of Black intellectualism and telling white people to go take care of your racism. And so many of us have made that a real project in our lives over the last decade. And, and so that they call us woke. And now there's this giant culture war that the woke people are radical socialists trying to cram down our agenda on to white people, who then become the grievance-oriented victims. And so that's one thing that's happening in our country. And the role of race, it goes back to our original sin of importing 4 million enslaved people to create the wealth of our country through extraction of resources and cotton. And it did not end until the Civil War in the 1860s. Some of us think we still haven't won the Civil War because it's called the lost cause, but it's got a lot of, people still carry the Confederate flag. There was a very brief period after the Civil War where the North of abolitionists and the troops occupied the South. And it was a period of Reconstruction, it was called. Voting rights for Black Americans, 94% of the Black population voted in the 1870s and the 1880s. And then over the next 40 years, that declined to 4%. So it was essentially then wiped out when federal troops left and the Southern slaveholders regained power. They call it redemption, redeemed the South, with the Jim Crow system, which was an apartheid, strict segregation, horrible racial oppression, lynchings, poverty. People that were formerly enslaved were free, but they were given absolutely nothing, became sharecroppers next to, they were very low wage, practically re-enslaved. And that lasted through really to the war and the Depression and the New Deal. And so that's a very long time. And so the recent history of the Black freedom movement is fairly recent. It's only since the 60s and the 70s. And you can't undo that kind of racial oppression in just a limited time. So it's still everywhere in our country. And also a lot of the racial oppression was encoded in our laws. For example, the New Deal legislation under Roosevelt right after the war Black people were excluded from being able to buy houses and get the GI Bill or federal mortgages. So the wealth gap has just grown over time. So it's just there's this wonderful book in America called The Color of Law, and it's just chapter and verse after chapter of how all of that racial oppression was institutionalized in every organization and in a lot of our laws. And then the second trend that I think is really important to understand is the rise of white nationalist supremacist religious people. The white evangelical movement has now aligned itself with the Proud Boys and with Trump and the right-wing populists. And that's quite a force then. So you have the evangelical and some of the conservative churches as the pipeline for right-wing populism. And that's why they put up with Trump, because they got their people on the Supreme Court and overturned abortion. So it's a very strong force, not maybe as strong as race, but you put those together and you got problems. And then the third thing to understand about the US, just at the initial framing, is that we have a very weird election system and very weird institutions that favor there were constitutional compromises from the very beginning, which favored Southern slaveholders. They wanted to be better represented than the Northern states, and they won. So our Senate is the most unrepresentative legislative body, I mean, possibly in the world, I don't know, but certainly in America, where things go to die, and where 3% of the population has 20% of the seats. And then when you add on to that, with filibusters and the requirements for supermajorities, they successfully stopped civil rights laws until the 60s and the 70s. And when President Johnson finally signed the Civil Rights Act, he said, we're giving the South to the Republicans for the generations to come. And that's what happened. The conservative Democrats left. They formed the more conservative right-wing parties, and the Democrats and Republicans ever since then have been really more and more polarized over time. But there's many aspects of our minority rule that we'll get into, I think, later. But I would say race, religion, and minority rule. So it's a wonder we get anything done, really.
Well, that's a mess. That's a lot of things interacting as well. We are very critical of the weaknesses in our own democracy. But what would you say is wrong with US democracy beyond the Senate? You've talked about that and the power of the South.
Well, I think the basic problem is that we don't have majority rule. It's not one person, one vote. It's like one vote in Wyoming is equal to 67 votes in California. So, Wyoming has like 600,000 people in it, and they have 2 Senate seats, and the Electoral College, that it's not a popular vote for the presidency. It's a vote for electors in each state that then go to Washington and do the official Electoral College vote. And those electors are based on Senate representation along with the House representation. So the 2 of the last 6 presidential elections, Hillary Clinton was one. She won the popular vote, lost the Electoral College vote because she had too many votes in California. They're not, it doesn't count if you have nearly as much if you vote in California. So I know that you're probably critical of your system, but the first time I visited Australia was in 1996. And I landed the day before the election was called, and it was Keating, right? And the election was called, and it was over the day before I left, 6 weeks later. And we campaigned for constantly, but at least 2 years is our campaign. So to have a campaign finished from beginning to end in 6 weeks, it was great. Secondly, you have a parliamentary system, so you have actual platforms. Our Republican Party does not have a governing platform. They decided they didn't need it in 2016 and 2020 because their ideas are unpopular, so they've moved over to culture. So all they talk about is trans rights and abortion and, the very important issues, but they're not governing issues. So I think having parties with platforms it's a good idea for a democracy, because you know what you're voting for. And then third, it was compulsory voting. I was on a wine tour on voting day, and the leader said, I just have to stop here. I have to go in and vote. And a couple of people got off the bus and went with her. She wasn't in her district, but she was able to and I realized that means that you have to campaign and talk to everybody. Our young people don't vote. They've given up. They call Republicans and Democrats Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And so, most of us are forced into voting for the lesser evil because we would like to have an alternative, but there isn't one. So we force our way into the Democratic Party as much as we can. But we don't have to vote. And so there's a huge number of people that don't vote, that if they did vote, poor people, people of color, young people, if we could just get them to vote. I know we're in the majority. I know, I just know it. But the people that vote are older, conservative, white, Christian, right-wingers. And finally, we don't have ranked choice voting. Preferential voting. Okay. So it's starting to take hold in the US. But that means we can't afford to vote for a third party candidate because that's just throwing your vote away. If I vote for a progressive Democrat that's running, then it's the same as voting for a Republican. So you just sort of really have to go with the mainstream Democratic candidates. We have no third parties. We don't have a Greens party. We don't have a Labor Party. We have the Democratic Party, which is sort of, sometimes progressive, but not always. And it's hard to get other movements to really have a voice, to really have a way to get their platform heard and listened to. It's very difficult. And it's just so frustrating. I can't tell you. That's our democracy.
Yeah, that's your democracy.
Yeah.
So next time you complain about ours, friends, it could be worse. It could be worse. So we're going to have to talk about the terrible figure who's been at the center of. We're survivors of that 1996 election. We saw that election together.
Yeah. Howard was elected. And went to the morning party.
Yeah. And, that's how many years of neoliberalism since that we've all got scars from, everyone in this room. But what's going on with Trump? Let's move into the now.
Trump is in a heap of trouble finally and at last. So just, first of all, it's just Trump. He did not create the problem, but he recognized the grievances of white voters and the racism and the anti-immigration and the shift up to the right. And he named it and he said, I'm your guy, I can fix it. And he then unleashed what was, I always called it sort of the, people came out of the closet labeled politically incorrect. Like they didn't feel like they could talk about their own feelings about race because they're too racist and they realize it. But now it's okay. It is totally okay in the US to be a complete and utter racist publicly. So he didn't create that. He just saw it. He's not as dumb as he looks. He knows how to read an audience and he knows. And so he has cornered that the right wing, anti-immigrant, anti-government, racist, grievance oriented, all of the changes that have happened with women's liberation and the manufacturing jobs going overseas and the decline of rural areas and the decline of manufacturing, the white working class is no longer in the Democratic Party partially because of the fall of the union movement, but they are voting their race rather than their class now. And so he engineered that in a very, actually it was pretty impressive way if you look at it from that. So he's got, but this is a culture war. He's a culture warrior, so it's anti-abortion, anti-trans rights, I know that you have some of that going on here. It's big time in the U.S. But he also spread lies. He's never lost anything, according to himself. He knows he lost the election, but he still maintains he won in 2020, and he created a set of lies that were egged on by talk radio, egged on by the media differences. And there are, 25% of our population believe it. Believe that election fraud happened, that Trump won, and that elections are no longer reliable. This is very dangerous territory for a democracy. And the conspiracy theories that then circulated, they have a different reality. They call it alternative facts to what I believe. I believe I'm reality-based. They believe they're reality-based. And we disagree on everything, including, what is happening on the ground. And it's really hard to talk to somebody that doesn't share reality with you. So where do you go with that? How do you try to drive policy or a movement when people really are stuck in conspiracy land? It's very sad. And I don't know how we're going to get out of that, because Trump is
going to lock him up.
Yeah.
Is that
so
going to happen?
I think he will ultimately go to jail, but I don't know what. We're hoping that this latest indictment it's like the first time a former president has ever been called to account and indicted. So he's going to be arraigned and arrested tomorrow. And we're hoping that all of the other bigger things that he did, besides this hush money and election fraud stuff, like he threatened the Secretary of State in Georgia that if he didn't overturn the electoral votes in Georgia, that it was the Secretary of State who would be going to jail. It's an out and out threat. And that's, election fraud. That's big. That's a felony. That's big. And then he's also got, he stole documents, classified documents. He's got tax fraud issues. There's a whole bunch of issues that could come his way. And he thinks it's going to help him in the election. I don't think it will. I think his base is shrinking, too slowly perhaps, but I think it really is shrinking. He's losing people. They've had it with him.
Yeah. So let's move on to the military-industrial complex, and we hear you've got some submarines to sell us. Tell us what you think about AUKUS, and are you going to be a really good ally?
Yeah, no, don't go down that rabbit hole. You followed us down too many other rabbit holes. Yeah. Afghanistan, Middle East. It's not worth it. We're not reliable ally for you. And I think it's part of this big geopolitical shift that the U.S. is trying to engineer. Our leaders are trying to shift from a focus to Europe to a focus to Asia, because we're concerned about China and what China might do to Taiwan. And so Biden is trying to lure you into being part of that Asian power. I was reading Geraldine Brooks. He had a really good interview to I don't know, it was in the Australian or something.
An op-ed in.
She said.
In the Sydney Morning Herald. Very good. Yeah,
she said, don't go down those rabbit holes. We followed the U.S. on too many military adventures. We're not reliable. It's a decades-long thing. Who knows what's going to happen to us? It's a drop in the bucket for us. $370 billion spare change. But for you, it's a huge amount of money, and it stretches over decades. Those costs are going to go up. I just don't see the advantage for you when there's plenty of long-term disadvantages. One thing she did say that I thought was pretty cute. She said, "Why should we be a lonely letter in an ugly acronym? AUKUS. An AUKUS, A, US, UK, the lonely letter." But that was brilliant.
Yeah, she's so clever, because she is Australian, so
Yeah.
So you'll get your chance before long to ask a question, or so if you've got questions that are on your mind, please be ready with them before too long. But let me go to climate action and to the crisis of climate, and ask you, what's the level of concern and action in the US on this issue?
It's a very fractured, we don't have a climate policy. We don't have green policy, party, I mean. So it's trying to get the climate agenda moving through the Democratic Party. And Biden has done more than any other administration, but it's mostly renewable energy, electrification, subsidizing electric vehicles, setting up mass charging stations, infrastructure development. It's not stopping oil and gas. Coal is dying in the US, and I think, except for maybe some of the mining communities, they realize that that's not going to rebound. But natural gas is still a big issue. And we've got, in Eugene, we've got a 360 group that is banning, and they successfully got our city council to ban natural gas in new developments. So you can't build a home with your gas stove anymore in Eugene. But that's why we're small potatoes. We're just a tiny town in Oregon. There's a climate movement. There's a lot of young people involved in it, but it's extremely fractured. And even while Biden is moving towards renewable energy, he's also decided to drill oil on the Alaskan tundra. He promised no oil on public lands, and he's revoking that promise. There are some native groups there that need the money, and they're in favor. And so there's this really unfortunate debate among the First Nations people in Alaska about the wisdom of that. But I would say that we don't have I don't think that the lobby and gas industry lobby is as powerful in the US as it is here, because your extraction issues, your resource extraction economy is much stronger than ours. We've kind of tapped a lot of the oil and fracking. We haven't completely tapped all of the supplies, but it's not as big a part of the politics here.
Yeah.
I mean, in the US as it is here, the way I read it.
Yeah.
But we have no way to track emissions. Emissions are still rising. We don't have a safeguard mechanism. We don't have a cap. Nothing like that exists at the federal level. So, where's the accountability? There is none. And we don't know how to make it happen because, we have the Senate to deal with. They don't believe in it. The Republicans do not believe in climate change. They're still deniers.
I've got to find a more positive question before I hand over to you, but I don't think I can, because I do want to ask you about abortion rights in the US and about the state of the women's movement and the trans issues, and then we'll be over to questions from the mob.
So the women's I grew up in the second wave feminist movement in the 70s, and we were all about getting women into the economy, even if we didn't fit in the male-dominated organizations. We tried to cram ourselves in there. And one really good thing is that President Biden hired a whole raft of feminist economists from the Economic Policy Institute, and they created a program for the care economy that was almost as good as what Barbara did.
Almost.
On her inquiry to the work and care. Yeah. And they included it in the first infrastructure bill that came before the Congress, but it got dropped almost immediately because Americans don't realize that the care economy is part of the infrastructure for an post-industrial society. So that fell by the wayside. The anti-abortion people have been organizing since Roe, so 40, 50 years, and piece by piece, and they are single issue voters, and they have their evangelical churches that they go out and vote in mass against against abortions. And so they were able to appoint 3 justices to the Supreme Court who've now overturned the federal guarantee to the right to an abortion based on the right to autonomy and privacy. So now so there's no federal right, and so now it goes state to state. And 26 of the 50 states have already outlawed abortion. Some of them just shockingly, like nothing, no abortion at any time, no matter what, rape, incest, health, health of the mom. So I'm proud to say I'm on the statewide Planned Parenthood policy board in Oregon, and we have the best policies in the country. We have no restrictions to abortion. We've just created a bunch of new clinics on the border. So we're welcoming women from all over the country. We've established a reproductive justice fund, which pays for their travel. We put them up, get them to the Planned Parenthood clinic, get them back on the airplane. But not everybody has that. A poor woman in Texas is going to be really, really handicapped if she needs to take care of her body. And it's an economic issue because you can't really, have control over your career and your life unless you can control issues about reproduction. So it's California, Oregon, and a few other states have excellent laws. But here's the good news is that every time it's been put to a statewide vote, even in states where the legislature is Republican and have tried to outlaw abortion, the plebiscites, the referenda that have voted on, have every single one is won by the pro-choice movement. So if we can get constitutional amendments state by state by state, we can protect the right to abortion in maybe half the states, which will be way more than half the population because the blue states really have a lot more people in them. We're just unrepresented at the federal level. Yeah. So I did want to say something about you asked me about progressive politics.
Yeah, just before though, say something about the trans issues, given what huge issue it's been here in the last 2 weeks.
The right wing has really jumped on this as an issue. It started with trans women participating in sports and the whole bathroom issue, and so there's a movement to make to whatever sex you're assigned at birth, that you cannot get health care that would damage that in any way. Young people, families are protesting against this. Parents that see the struggles, the suicides, the really cruel policies that brings to their families and their children. But it's a major cultural issue right now, and it's not a small thing. It's not.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that's really one focus of the left right now is just like protect people's rights.
So now, has anyone out there got it? I can ask questions all night here, but I can see a couple of hands here. Feel free to pop your hand up anytime. Kieran, I think, and then behind you, some women after that. Or
hi, Barbara. Is this working?
Yep.
Hi, Barbara. Hi, Margaret. Thank you for taking time to be here today and share your thoughts with us. My question is in regards to the next presidential election. Margaret, do you see any scope where Joe Biden doesn't run and perhaps a successful progressive campaign is waged from the left, perhaps from the likes of Sanders, Warren, or the Squad?
Yeah. No, I don't see it.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, no, I don't see it. I don't think Bernie has it in him to run again. Biden is 80 years old, and he looks 80 years old. But he has had a successful administration, and most of us are pretty pleased. Surprising. It was surprising that he did as well as he did. there is not a strong alternative right now. Elizabeth Warren she didn't do well. Kamala Harris, unfortunately, as vice president, is not a good candidate.
Can you say why?
So I criticize Biden for not prepping her more. That's what administrations need to do, is they need to bring up their vice president to be the next candidate. But he gave her impossible issues to solve. Nobody could have taken on her portfolio and come out ahead. But also, she's damaged herself. She has a huge staff turnover. She's got a bad reputation. She jumps on people. She misspeaks frequently. So I think that if Joe runs, which I expect him to do, and I expect Kamala Harris to be his running mate, that's gonna create some issues. Like, people are gonna go, 80-year-old guy, and this person that we're not really sure is ready to be president. So. And I don't know what the alternative is. I don't have a good answer for you. The squad, nobody there. The squad is really, they're all in the House of Representatives. They're very progressive, but they're just constantly, it's just like the rest of us, just trying to insert our issues at any time that we can and get traction on them. There's nobody in the Senate that is like the squad, that's for sure. So we don't have a good candidate. Elizabeth Warren, I don't think would be successful. Although, yeah, she's one of my heroines.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara and Margaret. Margaret, my question really is in two parts. How close did American democracy come to be destroyed when, during the 2020 election, when Trump and co were pressuring Republican officials in the close states that were being won by Democrats' votes? So can we be grateful that those officials stood up to Trump one way or another?
Absolutely.
And secondly, January the 6th, how close did American democracy come to being destroyed then?
It was just an amazing time to live through. It was very frightening. I actually thought that we would get through it, but I didn't think I'd have to rely on Mike Pence to do the right thing. Yeah. It's just stunning to me that the establishment Republicans have let this happen. They never pushed back against Trump. They never, said that he was telling lies. They let Fox News, which we now know, they knew they were spreading lies. They're being sued by Dominion, and that just got seated in the court. So it's clear to everybody now, I think, that it was all a big lie and that he incited the January 6th rally. His first campaign rally was just 2 weeks ago in Waco, Texas. That was the place where the Branch Davidians were shot at, and there was a massacre there, and they defended themselves against federal troops. And it was the beginning of the Proud Boys and the right wing property rights and the violent right wing. And he stood there, and instead of having the national anthem, they played this January 6th anthem. And the screen behind him were showing videos of January 6th. This is at a campaign rally. Trump standing there with his hand over his heart. So he is still on that, and he's still spreading that lie, and he won't back down. And we're all waiting for his party to call him to account. But he still has a base that they're afraid of.
Is it fair enough to say that American democracy came close to being destroyed?
Yes, it did. And it's still close because his base doesn't believe in elections anymore. But here's the good news, is that all of the election deniers, except two, who ran for Secretary of States, governors in the 2022 elections, they lost. And only one denier is still denying, and that's Carrie Lake in Arizona. She lost governor. She still says she won. She's not getting the traction that Trump has. So, we're squeaking through at the moment. Our election system held. Raffensperger in Georgia, some very courageous Republicans did stand up. But our election system is so decentralized. We have these little tiny election offices run by election clerks, and they are getting death threats. So they're quitting, like, I didn't sign up for this. You know, it's like hand-to-hand combat. It's really war there. So I think it's still precarious, and it was close. It's still close. I hate to say it. I mean, the American democracy is kind of on the edge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is kind of for both of you. What do you think Australia can learn from the US, and what do you think Australia can learn? What can the US learn about Australia?
What can Australia learn from the US? What the US can learn from Australia? Well, remember 1996?
Yeah.
And Margaret said to me on the night of Howard's election, "You do not know what's coming. Your Labor movement are going to be wiped out. You will hit 11% union density." I secretly thought, no way. But, you know, absolutely correct. Our Labor movement was wiped out by a whole bunch of things, but including hostile labour law under Howard. I think we can learn, and then you go, to hang on to some characteristics of our democracy that are really important, like preferential voting and compulsory voting. They're very, very important. And my question for you, after you've answered what you can learn from us, is what your impressions were of our parliament based on what you saw last week. But yeah, what do you think?
Well, I would just warn against giving a platform to the right-wing populist movements. You know, like, we had our right-wing movement invited Orban from, was it Hungary? Turkey, sorry, to America, and he headed up the conservative political meeting a year and a half ago. And, you know, he's like anti-immigration, anti-trans, anti-everything, anti-government. So just be careful of that. That right wing can take hold. If they could spread lies, conspiracy theories, that's really been a big downfall for us. And we don't have the election machinery to fight against it because we have minority rule. And they have set themselves up for being able to rule for a long time through gerrymandering the districts. They make sure that, like in Nashville, they just redistricted, and they took 2 Democratic districts and put them into one, so that we're only 1 Democratic district in Tennessee now, in Nashville. And, you know, so they've done this, and it extends their rule. It just allows them, they've done a really good job of minority rule. So just watch out for that, and don't give up compulsory voting. Don't give up your minority parties. Having the Greens have a seat. I was just so proud and amazed. And there was more substantive discussion last week, in 1 week in Parliament, than I've heard in the US for like 6 months. You know, like a mechanism. Oh, what an idea. You're going to measure emissions and actually do something about it. No, we don't have anything like that. So I think having that ability to have a say, you know, besides these 2 giant parties that we have, is really, really critical.
The other thing, I think, that was such a good question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
The other thing, having just had the by-election in Aston, where the Conservatives are in such a bad place, and they're interpreting their lessons as to move further to the right. And it's really, it's so weird to sit in the Parliament. And, you know, the Greens have their differences in our party room. I'd say our party room culture is very strong and positive at present. But I look across at the opposition and I see Simon Birmingham and Alex Antic. And I think, how do those guys talk to each other in their party room? They're just each end of the spectrum. And I think what we're seeing is less of what you have seen so much of, which is really wacky, right-wing, religious, racial, anti-trans, trying to provoke a big cultural war. And certainly there are the warriors in our parliament who are trying to do that. But they are 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, 4 of them sit together often, Hanson and so on. But there isn't, I think we are moving in a different direction. at the moment. And maybe I'm over-optimistic about that, but I think that's a really important lesson about having conservatives call out bad conservatives and progressives call out bad conservatives. Very important.
Like in the US, I think the Republican nominee will be either Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, who's the governor of Florida. And he's like, he passed this don't say gay law. You can't teach about gay. They have removed any discussion of race in elementary school education, race or gender identity. Book banning is, it's unbelievable what he's doing. And he is going to, so that's what he's going to run on. He's going to run on culture wars. And so is Donald Trump. So, we have to, we're going to run on economics and climate and
I found the fact that we're here for a discussion around what's challenging, I won't say wrong, but challenging in the United States, but strangely quiet on the Second Amendment.
So, I'm sorry. I meant to mention that in addition to race and religion, we have this other sort of characteristics of rugged individualism, gun rights. We don't have a collective bone and body politic in the U.S. So it's always been about my rights. And the gun rights has been propped up also by the undemocratic Supreme Court. They and the Republicans are the ones that refuse to do common sense gun laws. We used to have a ban on assault rifles, and the number of mass shootings was quite low. And then once that was overturned by the Republicans, the leading cause of death of children right now is guns.
And if I may just steal one last question, why is it taking so long to indict Trump?
To indict Trump?
To indict him. Yeah, I'm interested in that.
Yeah, well, right. He did most of his dirty work in New York, which is one of the, mostly clean politics, I'd say, in terms of, being able to bribe and get around stuff. But New York's one place where you can do a lot of maneuvering to get out of things. And so corruption. He was a billionaire there, and supposedly he was a billionaire, and a reality TV star. And so he's got lots of tax problems, but he's been able to get away from that. And then there was presidents have never been criminally charged or indicted, presidents or past presidents. I don't know if they acted like Trump, but he's clearly a criminal.
When Nixon was let off, wasn't he?
He was pardoned. And that was a bad move. Thank you. Yeah, he was pardoned by Ford, and we never really got over that. That was a bad thing. So I think that and this hush money thing, that was from 2016. It's past the statute of limitations, by the way. And one of the theories of the case is that the statute of limitations paused for the 4 years that he was president. So it can get under the statute of limitations. A lot of lawyers are going, are you kidding me? It's not going to work. So, we don't know how strong that case is, but I think it will. I think now, the novelty is off, and I think he will. I shouldn't make prognostications because I'm wrong a lot of the time, because he just keeps having 9 lives, 20 lives. But I think that he's going to find himself in a lot of legal trouble soon.
Catherine.
Hi, so we're streaming to Facebook Live, and a question came through asking for your thoughts on the plight of Julian Assange. Just wanted to feed that in.
Yeah, I don't have enough knowledge of that. Free speech and probably needs to be released and have a life. Yeah, but I don't know.
A lot of action in the. That's a great question. Yeah, and really important.
It's not an issue in the U.S.
Yeah, well, it is a big issue here. Yeah. And we recently saw the 3 key players, the British, the US, and the Australian prime ministers and leaders together talking, submarines. And they did not, as far as we know, because we asked questions about it in Parliament last week, talk about Assange. Yeah. And there is a really a strong group of Australians who feel journalism is not a crime, and he should be released. And it is not enough to do soft diplomacy, which was an opportunity that our Prime Minister did not take when he was in conversation with Biden. Assange is important. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Jean-Marie.
Jean-Marie?
When I saw your topic, I was so happy to know who can talk about America about what is wrong there, because I think most of the mark who I shared this topic, your topic, they say how you can talk in Australia, you doesn't talk that in America, because I say maybe it's good to know what is going on there. My first question is to know, to tell about more achievement, more change about two administrations, Trump administrations and the Biden administrations. Because most of administration, when they came around the world, we panic, special democratic administrations. We would like to know exactly what is going on, why around the world we can panic about the administration of America.
So the question is about, let me see if I get this right. What is going on between the last two administrations in terms inside them that is a cause of panic around the world? Yeah.
Well, Trump just thinks everything's a crisis, and the right wing just thinks that the country is going in the wrong direction. That the government is corrupt, that they are acting in their own interests. He's the one that can save us from the radical socialists, and it's not what most people would say about America, but that he made his administration this very dark picture that he painted about America and how he was the one that could fix it. So I can say that about panic.
And is it fair to say, given what you were saying earlier, that the panic is up here and he's got his loyal 25% of, but down here are people who've given up, a lot of young people who are not paying attention to the panic that he's engendering. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair enough, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Second question is to know about your movement, because you are, maybe we don't know if you are many people they think about what is wrong in America. Do you have any movement they think like you? Thank you so much.
So what is happening to the progressive movements?
There's a lot of progressive people in the United States. Every single state, every single city, there's a progressive person, but that person has to decide if they're going to work on abortion or climate or women's rights or trans rights, LGBTQ, unions, labor rights. And we are so fractured. We don't have, a really strong party that goes across all those issues. So there are progressive movements, dozens of them. And you can find a movement to be part of it in any community, and all of us have. We just have trouble putting it all together. And we don't have the architecture of majority rule that would help out a lot. Because if we could get the majority to vote, I know we'd win.
Make a difference.
Make a difference anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. John.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. I'm just wondering whether you could talk a bit more about, it's a voluntary voting system, and you were making comments about how, young people, they don't vote and people feel disaffected, but also on the right, there's people who don't trust the system. So maybe they think it's corrupt and won't vote. So is there plans by progressives or that battle to get the vote out? Are there signs that progressives are coming together to get more people out, more younger people out, to convince them to vote, to get blacks enrolled, etc.?
Yeah.
Or is it a situation where the religious right are corralling the vote and doing better?
Actually, I think we're winning on the vote and to get out the vote. So, for example, we in Oregon started the Vote by Mail movement, and one of the big, wonderful things about it is that you can find out who's already voted when they submit their ballot, a week in advance or something. And so you don't have to call them anymore. You don't have to go help them, but you know where to go to get out the vote. And Stacey Abrams in Georgia, who, ran for governor, brilliant woman. She has almost single-handedly changed voter oppression. It's another thing about minority rule is that the Republicans in power have obstructed the vote, poll taxes and gerrymandering and stuff. But she mobilized the Black community, and there's a Poor People's Campaign in the South, Reverend Barber, and so that they are voting in a much bigger proportion now. And I think I said before that the freedom struggles of Black Americans is so impressive. They have intellectually very forward-looking. They have institutions that they're building, and Get Out the Vote is one of them. So there's a lot of good things happening. It's just, we took one red state and elected 2 Democrats, and that's why the Democrats still have the Senate. It's because of that Get Out the Vote. Thanks for that question. That was, there are some places where we are winning.
Any women want to jump up, please feel free. Got a lot of guys, which is great. Don't sit down, but just want to encourage any women there. Thank you.
I just wanted to know what happens if the Democrats and Republicans fail to agree on America's debt ceiling.
On the debt ceiling?
Yeah, on the debt ceiling.
Oh, it would be a catastrophe. And they say the Republicans say they won't let it happen. So the way we have this stupid, the legislature and the Congress appropriates money, spends money on programs, and then, but we've capped the amount of money that we can borrow that is indexed to some level. And so periodically, once a year, we run up against the debt ceiling. So we can't pay our debts. It's not about appropriating more money. It's just about paying what we owe. And since we're the major currency in the world, if we don't pay, our debts, then really it's a financial disaster around the world. And everybody knows that. And they haven't they've never let it actually happen. The Republicans have shut down the government a couple of times and lost big because people do like to get their Social Security retirement checks and Medicare. So shutting down the government really doesn't work either. So they will cave. The Republicans in the House will cave, but they'll make it really nasty and on the wire, and we'll look foolish like we always do.
Hi. Excuse me, actually, I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to oppose your ideas about the Democrats being progressive. Democrats started war in Libya. Obama started war in Libya, and what we did, we just give him the Nobel Prize. And right now, I'm thinking that your ideas has stopped in 2020, but right now 3 years is gone. What is causing war in the world? What is causing this nuclear war that is ahead of us? That's Democrats. This is not Trump. Everybody forget about Trump. We were expecting Democrats to see something. I fought with lots of my friends that something is going to change, but nothing, and everything is gone bad. All the neocons, all those fascism come to the Democrats, and what we have now, we are having a very bad war with Russia directly, and this is not even indirect. And right now, I am thinking that American hegemony is also causing the war into more war, and unfortunately, Australia is also taking part in that, and they are going to be involved in that war too.
So I won't debate you on that. It's exactly right. I agree. I didn't mean to say the Democrats are progressive. I mean, if I said that, people have that idea. No, it's just many of us progressives are forced to deal with the Democrats because we have no alternative. And they are warmongers. The military-industrial complex is by far the most important lobby and force in America. It has to do with the nuclear submarines, but we have waged war. Our footprint around the world is shockingly disastrous all over time. So no, I don't I don't disagree with you.
I think your questions takes us into a foreign policy discussion, which
Yeah.
is very important, certainly very important to Australians, but it's a really important discussion. And you and I have been talking about the expenditure in the US on weapons, the sale of weapons to fascist states, essentially, is a major part of the economy of America.
And we prop up we have a history of choosing the wrong side. Constantly, practically.
And actually, my main question is about Barbara. And what is your plan in the future if there is because clearly we have all the countries, they are choosing one side. For example, right now, most of the countries, they want to just put aside dollar. They want to trade in yuan or other kind of currencies. So it is clear that in the future there would be some challenges choosing China or United States. So do you have any clear plan that's what we should do to be as a neutral, at least, not to be pro-war?
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's a really
out of office.
I mean, it's an existential issue, and it's one that we really must come to grips with. We are being led, both countries, into an uncritical, antagonistic position to China,
Right.
and both parties in Australia, major parties, are certainly on the same page on that front.
Yeah.
And clearly the same threat is underway to make people frightened in the US. And in Australia, it has really strong salience because the threat from the north was what led us into the Vietnam War. I mean, I'm old enough to have marched against the Vietnam War. And that was all, there's this deep sort of psychological button for Australians, which is being activated by Richard Marles and by the Conservatives as well on a unity ticket. So my view and the view of the Greens Party is we need an independent stance in our foreign policy, and the AUKUS decision in particular is a really totally the wrong direction. It puts us into tight alliance with a country recently led by Trump, and that is not impossible to return, but it's wrong on so many other fronts. It challenges our sovereignty. Anyone who thinks we're going to be running American-made submarines, nuclear-powered, with a issue, the whole question of an independent foreign policy is very, very important. And we have asked a number of questions in the Senate in the last 2 weeks. That's the main period we've had. 3 weeks we've had in Parliament in March, and AUKUS has been a topic of quite vigorous discussion. And there is a movement within the Labor Party. And, Albanese cut his political teeth on an anti-nuclear position, on an independent foreign policy position. So did Tanya Plibersek. There is a tradition in the ALP, which, we hear a little of now, but really not enough in the dominant leadership voice from both the major parties. So really important question to have. And there are people coming out of defence, retirees out of defence, experts saying this is ridiculous. This is not the technology for today, let alone 30 years' time. So I think this is a very important question for us to be well informed about. We need our journalists, and we need to be paying attention and have our peace movement activated to defend a position of not neutrality necessarily, but certainly of independence.
Independence, yeah, and sovereignty. Progressives have the least amount of success in anti-defense work. There's peace and justice organizations, very solid, long-standing organizations. We have had practically zero effect on our military-industrial complex.
Thank you for raising the issue and putting a position. It's a very important question.
Senator Whitehouse can't be here tonight, but he has done a lot of investigation of dark money, and you've raised a lot of problems which aren't changing. You've got something like 70% of your people want tighter gun laws, but they can't get them legislated. You've got crap electoral laws, but you can't get it changed. And so these things go on. Could you comment to us on how you see any chance of stemming the flow of dark money or revealing it so it's no longer dark?
Well, yeah, there are some disclosure laws, and Biden, I think, talks about it, but it's a very big problem that capitalism, neoliberalism has just still in control, the corporate money, and then a lot of that, the Koch brothers and the like have gone into more darker, behind the scenes areas. And I'm not an expert on it at all. I just know that it rules the day still. So I don't have, money in politics in the US is really the source of many of our problems.
Well, some of the rulings of the Supreme Court have been complicit in establishing the means to do that.
Yeah, and we have a very undemocratic Supreme Court, elected for life. Many of them are young, and we used to think of the Supreme Court as sort of one of the last checks and balances, and that we could rely on the Supreme Court for a reasonable interpretation, but no longer. They're solid right wing now, and they understand. They're the ones that made corporations individuals in the purposes of campaign money. So they say,
goes right down into your electoral districts, where candidates who say they want gun reform suddenly find there's money against them. Big advertising.
National rights gun lobby is not as strong as it used to be, but it still holds sway. And just the mass shooting in Nashville school the other day, the Republican representative in Congress from Nashville said, "We can't fix it. If a criminal wants to shoot people, we can't change that." It's really just
amazing.
Yeah.
We've got another
Very
question
frustrating.
behind you. Thank you.
Hi there. I just first want to say thank you both for being here and giving us this opportunity to hear you speak and ask you questions. My question's for Barbara. On the safeguard mechanism, realistically speaking, do you think that we have a chance in passing vital amendments to put a stop to all new coal and gas? Or do you believe that the government has hit a ceiling in what they're willing to amend with last week's announcement?
Thank you. A really good question. It won't stop all new coal and gas. That's my view. And we know that's what we actually need to do. And it's not what the Greens think needs to happen, though we do. It is what the science tells us we need to do. Last week was a very culmination of a long